This morning, what we're going to start with is securitization. And then we're going to move on into a handful of other sort of calculations, and actually today you will get a full lunch from 12 to 1. Then we're going to have a guest speaker coming in, speaking on finance from 1 to 2, and then we'll come back for the development class and do a quick little review, and then start that test, and then after you're done with that test, then we're done. Okay? So that's the plan for today. So let's get started with the real estate securitization stuff. So let's kind of set the stage for exactly, first of all, what securitization is, but kind of how it all began. Okay.
This is the finance class?
Yes. Yes, this is the finance class. All morning, it is the finance class. Until 2-ish. Okay. Okay. So with securitization, this is the whole thing of where we've talked about this business of where a local bank will make a loan. Once they have made that loan, they will typically, they'll make obviously as many loans as they can make until they have they've run out of their own money. Okay, so a local bank might have, let's say $100 million to actually loan out. All right, so once they have made $100 million worth of loans, unless they're going to continue to service those loans, they're done in terms of lending because they have no more money to lend. So in order to allow them to continue lending, what happened is basically these sort of secondary markets have been created whereby those loans can then be sold to third-party individuals. They can be potentially other lenders, they can be high net worth individuals, can be institutional investors, whoever can actually buy those loans. Now normally what will take place is that local bank will package those loans together into a securitization deal. And some of those loans may be, on a commercial securitization, there's not inherently going to be a lot of consistency among those loans. There can be, but not always, okay? In a lot of cases, the commercial loans, could be a few smaller sort of commercial loans packaged with some roughly large loans. Could be just one singular loan that's a big one that gets sent off into securitization. But the whole idea behind securitization is it is an opportunity for you as a local lender to actually sell off your loan portfolio to someone else. That's the big picture. However, what begins to be interesting is what actually takes place once those loans are sold off into the secondary mortgage markets in terms of how those loans get repackaged. And that's the part that is really interesting and actually has caused a lot of the chaos that we've had over the past 15, 20 years with regard to sort of the financing markets, is that how that actually takes place and what actually happens there. So, and also who some of those purchasers of those loans are. All right, so let me back up and give another part of the story. We'll all kind of try to put together. What group of investors would you say probably has more money than they possibly know what to do with? And this is talking like a broad category. That they've got to place money every single year. They're only getting more money each and every year that they've got to place, and they've got to find safe, high quality, low risk, and effectively low return sort of investments.
Pension funds?
Pension funds. Okay? And so you've got these massive retirement funds, okay, that have been around for years and years, and they are limited by law as to what they can invest in, okay? There's a law, it's called ERISA, okay? Look it up, E-R-I-S-A, okay? Employment, Retirement, and Income Security Act, okay? What ERISA effectively says is, as a pension fund, retirement fund, you are limited. Now this is not talking about like your 401k plans, that sort of thing. This is talking about a traditional sort of pension fund like calipers like California, sort of, like teachers and public, officials and, that sort of thing, or, major, companies that might have these sort of funds, but a lot of times they're public sector sort of pension funds, and once again, limited in scope as to what they can invest in. So, traditionally, these folks were limited to predominantly investing in very, very low-risk securities, okay? And so it pretty much meant like utility companies, and for the most part, government bonds that they would be able to invest in. All right, so we fast forward to somewhere in the 1980s, and effectively folks began to realize we can restructure debt to actually make it into a variety of types of securities that will throw off different rates of return and have different risk profiles. And so what sort of happened is you have the situation of where you can take an existing set of loans and package them in such a way that you've got this entire portfolio of, let's say, $100 million worth of commercial real estate loans. And just to keep things simple, you've got maybe 100 $1 million loans, okay? Now, the interest rate, let's say, on that pool of loans combined might be, let's say, 6% overall for the pool of loans. So, under normal circumstances, you would just say, all right, we're going to sell this set of loans out into the secondary mortgage markets, and you would just sort of think, all right, the investor that buys these loans, they're effectively buying nothing more than a fixed income security at 6%. Okay? And that's traditionally, sort of how it was sort of done. Well, but couldn't we instead restructure this in such a way as to say, let's take this entire portfolio of these 100 loans, each, $1 million, all throwing off supposedly 6%, and create 3 different sort of levels, or what we call tranches, okay, of investments. We're going to create what we're going to call an A tranche, a B tranche, and a C tranche. Each one of these is going to have a different risk-return sort of profile. The tranche A is going to be low risk, low return. Whereas the C tranche, effectively high risk, high return. And then, of course, the middle one, medium risk, medium return. You're saying, well, okay, how do we accomplish this? All right? Think of it like this. You've got all of these loans that are going to effectively be sending in their mortgage payments every single month. All those mortgage payments are just going to collect in a big bank account. All right? All kind of muddled together. But what you're going to do is, as soon as you get those mortgage payments that month, the sum of the securitization deal, then what you're going to do is you're going to pay off the Group A folks first out of whatever cash flow. Sort of think of it as like a big funnel that you're sort of throwing all the money into as it comes in, but then the first to get paid are the Group A folks. All right? And it begins to be what we call a waterfall effect. Okay? You think of that situation of, like, if you've ever gone to a wedding, they've had those champagne glasses, tiered up. You know, it's kind of like you can pour in the top one, and then after the top one is full, it flows over to the next ones and the next ones and the next ones. That's exactly how this sort of works, in that the top glass, if you will, is this tranche A, okay? But once it gets full, once you've effectively paid it off or you have paid them, then whatever money is left over flows down to B. Once B has been paid off, then it all flows down to C. Does that make sense? Yeah. Now, it's a simple concept, but here's what happens. Now, if a property or multiple properties within the portfolio of loans defaults, in other words, they stop making their payments, or they're late making their payments, or for whatever reason they get foreclosed on, whatever happens that's negative, who is that going to affect first?
C.
C. Okay? So these folks are taking on, supposedly, that risk, okay? And so the idea is that at some point, after you have enough defaults, then it's going to migrate up the food chain to a certain extent to the tranche B and then to the tranche A. Okay? Makes sense, yes?
Yeah.
Okay? The part that's interesting, or the part that really begins to be kind of, well, not unusual, but certainly problematic, is, well, what percentage of this portfolio do you classify as being A versus B versus C? Because if we were to classify maybe this, or the top portion of that being 5%, and maybe this being 15% of the portfolio, and then this being the remaining 80% for a total of 100%, then what we're saying is that 80% of the loans would have to go bad before B and A would ever be affected. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Everybody follow that logic? Yes? But whenever we're putting this portfolio together, we as the investment banker are saying we don't want to do that. We actually would prefer to flip it. Okay? In other words, to put more in A, less in B, and even a smaller amount in C, because we would be able to effectively pay out a lower overall percentage return to the investors as a whole. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And so what happens is this whole mismatching. So for example, let me just kind of, so assume that we kind of follow what I was just saying. If we do 5%, we do 15%, and we do 80%, and ultimately the overall portfolio is to add up to 6%, then we've got to look at, well, what is the allocation that potentially is going to allow us to get to that. Now, we can kind of, back solve for this a little bit to sort of, help us out in taking basically, in this case, let's just kind of do the math here. No, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm just going to do it back into it a little bit differently and try this a different way. let's do this instead. Let's just sort of start off and let's say that we make B an average return of 6%. All right, and we keep that at 15%. Which will give us 0.9. And then the A tranche, let's say that we give them a 4% rate of return. Okay. 1, that'd be 4.9 to give us 6. Double check that. So 6.125 plus 0.2. Okay. So under this scenario, to get the overall sort of portfolio of 6%, you could give the tranche A folks 4% overall rate of return. That represents 5% of the portfolio, and then so the weighted average of that, or the weighting of that on the overall return would be 0.2. The middle tier, medium risk, 6% times 15% of the portfolio, be 0.9, and then we sort of back solve into tranche C, which would throw off a 6.125% rate of return, but that's 80% of the portfolio, and then that's obviously the bulk. Now, what if we sort of change this a little bit? We still give A 4%, we still give B 6%, but we change the relative weightings. And we still ultimately want to end up with 6%. So what we could do is we could say, all right, let's give the tranche A folks 80%, we keep the tranche B at 15, and then we go with the tranche C at 5% of the portfolio. What is that going to mean that the return is going to be for the tranche C folks? So okay. So by switching things around, what we're able to do is effectively increase the overall rate of return dramatically to the tranche C investors to potentially be 38%, and ultimately that's only 5% of the portfolio. So you could sell really easily to a group of investors and say, look at what we can do for you. We can give you potentially a 38% rate of return on this portfolio. But the problem is, if only a handful of loans prepay, default, go bad in any way, that return gets eaten away really quick. Plus, literally, if 5% of your overall portfolio goes bad, then what begins to happen? All of a sudden, the tranche B folks start to get eaten into. If 20% of your portfolio, those two added together, go bad, then all of a sudden the tranche A folks get hurt. Now, here's the thing, this is the part that I guess I'm wanting to make sure that goes into your mind. Which of these two sort of portfolios is more risky to the investor? Without question, the second one, okay? And specifically, regardless of whether we're talking about A, B, or C, it's risky, more risky to all of them, all right? But the whole thing here, and this is the part that I guess you're trying to wrap your head around, is the way that we go about marketing this is we're marketing it as if that tranche A and that tranche B, in both instances, are effectively the same risk, but they're not. Does that make sense, everybody?
Yeah.
And so this was one of the big problems that occurred whenever these sort of securitizations were originally born. You know, in this, you've heard of commercial mortgage-backed securities. Well, this is, you know, kind of fundamentally how they work, okay? And so what you would have happen would be the investment bankers effectively constructing these portfolios, and as I said, in many instances, very heavily weighting them, you know, on the returns for or you know, creating what perceived to be very low risk sort of investment opportunities. And part of the reason they would do this is because they could sell these things off easily to the pension funds. Because the pension funds were looking for anything that with a very low risk profile. Now, the key to being able to do that would be, you know, to say, look, these guys are getting paid first, you know, this is a, you know, low risk situation, but also, you know, this whole thing of you've created effectively this new financial instrument that represents real estate. And so it became a new cheaper source of capital for real estate. And this is competing directly with the traditional sort of sources of capital, all right? And so as a result, this had a very significant impact on lowering the overall cost of borrowing for commercial real estate than traditionally had been present, and also introducing a lot of money into the system that had previously not been available to real estate into the system, okay? And so this is all happening in the, you know, in beginnings of it, you know, in the late 80s, but really took full force in the 1990s and the early 2000s, where this became, you know, infinitely, you know, popular. And so as a result, what you end up having is so much money coming from these pension funds chasing after these returns because they're led to believe these are very low risk, because the alternative was, okay, we're going to invest in, once again, government securities, which might just be a fraction of a percentage less than this 4%. Does that make sense? Dustin?
So when two questions. When the loan would be paid off, would the principal portion then go back in that sort of waterfall effect? So if $1 million
Yeah, normally that would go into the overall pool and then would just simply be paid out as a set of cash flows, but yet indirectly it would still affect normally the tranche C folks, because that would be a loss of long-term revenue, but it would be a sort of a short-term kind of, you know, stabilization within the overall mix. But this is also part of the reason why you have the emergence, or even more so of an emergence, of the prepayment penalties. Because the prepayment penalties would be set up in a way to effectively mitigate that loss of the early prepayment by creating something they called defeasance. And what this defeasance would effectively do is charge enough of a prepayment penalty to the borrower that that money would then be used to effectively continue to pay the investors what they were owed in terms of their interest for the remainder of the term. in some cases. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
Because
we-
that's also another thing to sort of keep in perspective here, is that many of these securitization deals were matched with these short-term kind of 5-year time horizons. So it's not as if, once again, we're talking about this is inherently being stretched over 25, 30 years like it is on the residential side. This is, you know, these are securities that are typically created for 5 years in duration, and then at the end of 5 years, you've got to, as a borrower, have got to come back and get it refinanced again. But during that 5 years, God forbid you should want to pay off that loan or sell off that property, because if you did, in many cases, you were hit with those, as I said, extremely outrageous prepayment penalties in the form of defeasance that would basically just mean you would just be better off keeping and making payments on the property for the full 5-year term and then selling it off or refinancing it or whatever else you needed to do. Because, I mean, think about it like this. You own a property and you've financed it, and you've got this relatively low-cost financing that you've, you know, engaged with the lender on, but during that 5-year period, a lot can happen. Interest rates could go way down, and you're thinking, oh, I'll just refinance. But if you do, chances are you're still going to be obligated to make effectively those interest payments for the duration of that 5-year term because of the prepayment penalties. Or, somebody really wants to buy my property, I can't sell it because I'm precluded from doing so, effectively for that 5-year term without, once again, triggering all these penalties. And so it's a system that was meant to create these, you know, effectively short-term sort of securities for 5 years that would have fixed cash flows, predictable, reliable, and that was kind of the whole idea behind being able to get the lower cost financing. But the reality of the situation is that as borrowers, a lot of times they really didn't realize what they were even getting themselves into. They were just saying, oh, this loan is a cheaper loan, I'm going to go with that one, but not realizing all those extra sort of strings were attached. Make sense? You have another question about that?
Yeah, I was just, if there's a surplus, do they get?
A lot of times what would happen is it would typically go into C, and that was where C could potentially benefit, is that it a lot of times would be the beneficiary of the surplus, or sometimes it would get scraped off the top by the actual investment bank firm themselves, that whenever they actually put this deal together, they would, in essence, sort of create yet another sort of layer to this, and then just scrape off a, you know, a piece for themselves. And obviously, by doing so, you know, can potentially put the whole thing kind of in jeopardy in the event that something does blow up and doesn't quite perform as what one would have expected it to. Okay. So what do you think about this? This whole idea of, and to a certain extent, you know, at its very core, you know, this, you've heard the term financial engineering. I mean, how many of you have heard that term before? Okay. This, to a certain extent, is just an example of that, okay? Of where, in essence, you're taking an existing set of cash flows, an existing set of debt, repackaging it into something different, selling that debt off. In other words, this new debt is representing, effectively, other existing debt. I mean, but what do you think about that just as a concept? It's just kind of, it's like, once again, you're kind of tearing apart the asset and then selling off bits and pieces of it, but yet you're not selling off individual bits and pieces, you're selling off pieces of the collective whole.
I think it makes sense. I mean, maybe somebody doesn't want to buy a $100 million portfolio, so they can buy these, you know, these tranches that fit their risk profile.
Okay.
And in reality, a lot of that's how the American currency runs, off of mitigating risk by pooling things together.
Okay.
So it's kind of one of the reasons we're in trouble, because I don't really see that ever being sustainable. You know,
Yeah,
something like that.
It's a little bit of a challenge because it works well whenever everything performs as predicted. Whenever some piece of it sort of blows apart, then all of a sudden corrupts the whole system real quickly. But part of the problem with this is that whenever a lot of these deals were being put together, the scrutiny that the originators were receiving from the rating agencies like Standard & Poor's, Moody's, Fitch, the independent rating agencies, a lot of these rating agencies really did not fully understand what was really going on in terms of the risk profile of these portfolios. They didn't really, to a certain extent, grasp this whole thing of where these things were being reproportioned in such a way of making them more risky to the investor. They were just simply looking at, oh, well, okay, well, these guys get paid first, so therefore they are the low risk and so forth, so on, but didn't really do a great job of assessing, well, what should be the appropriate proportions, what should be the appropriate payouts, and kind of overlooking the fact that these originators were making millions and billions of dollars of this sort of scraping off the top of the portfolio as a whole. That the portfolio as a whole, kind of getting back to our example, maybe was throwing off 6%, but yet the piece that they were really putting into the portfolio, maybe they were only putting 5% of the 6%, if you will, into what they were selling off, and then keeping that 1% for themselves. Do you follow? Well, that 1% on a $100 million portfolio, or once again, billions of dollars of having done this, adds up really quickly. Yeah. Yep.
What Jeannie Mae was going to...
Yeah, I mean, that's the residential sort of side of things, but on the commercial side, the normal sort of commercial mortgage-backed securities, this is sort of how it's set up. Now, the residential side, in terms of like Fannie Mae, Ginnie Mae, Freddie Mac, all, that sort of, those tend to be a lot different and a lot, for the most part, a lot safer. They're also structured over the entire loan term, instead of it just being, a 5-year sort of hold. Most of these are going to be over like a 30-year hold, and so a little bit safer. Yep.
So how does it work? Like Bank of America would do a commercial loan, and then they would call up Morgan Stanley and say, hey, we've got a pool of loans, can you guys underwrite it?
That's exactly what happens.
So then that gives Bank of America an opportunity to kind of cherry pick the ones that they want to send over there, so they can keep.
Yeah, and that was a
what
big
they
problem.
think is the best
No, and that was a big
in-house.
problem as well, is because sometimes what they would do is they would take loans they knew weren't all that great, and then kind of package them together with some that were really attractive. And then you'd have the folks that are actually once again kind of putting this together, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, or whoever, and trying to ferret through all of that sort of information. Whereas the bank actually knew best, but yet the information, the flow through of information wasn't always the best, to the folks that were actually doing the true underwriting of the actual mortgage-backed security.
This process also is what caused the banks to start, sending out subprime loans.
Well, yeah,
because they knew they were getting rid
well,
of it.
on the residential side, absolutely. On the commercial side, it's still this issue of they probably were trying to be reasonably responsible when they're making the loans, but yet at the same time, there's still that incentive to have the production volume of let's make as many loans as we possibly can. The money is there. Let's just keep plugging it out. I mean, imagine once again trying to put all this together. Whenever you've got once again a virtually unlimited supply of capital coming from pension funds predominantly, flowing in to a market like this, it's just kind of being a kid in the candy store of saying, yeah, okay, any real estate loan you almost bring to them, okay, we'll make it, kind of thing, and then throw it off into this deal, and then ultimately who gets left holding the bag? Well, at some point, if enough of the loans go bad, that pension fund is the one that gets left holding the bag. Yep.
So what's the big reforms that they did? I mean, other than tightening the standards of
That's
funding,
really
and I guess you know, the banks have to have a little bit more skin in the game, but.
Well, there's also, once again, as we've talked about in this class before, the reporting requirement aspect. You know, of requiring more and more information from the borrowers with respect to how the property is performing over that time period, and requiring that information in some cases in almost a real-time format, or certainly within, you know, every 30 days kind of format.
Is it possible for like a, you know, say a bank is selling a, you know, bundle and Morgan Stanley goes, well, I don't like this one and I don't like this one. Can, you know, is
They
it
can
almost like a
potentially,
deal
yeah,
structure kind of
they
where
can, you know, in some instances yank those out or put those off into a separate, you know, sort of situation, but a lot of times it tends to get just sort of packaged together. It's kind of like, okay.
How many do you think on that? I mean, obviously there's all different kind of, you know, sizes, but you know, how many loans are within one, you know?
It really, I mean, there's no absolute consistency because, you know, if you even just sort of like Google typical CMBS deal, it's all over the map. Because I mean, I've seen some with literally one or two properties in the portfolio because it's a large enough, you know, multi-tenanted property, you know, that sort of thing. But then, you know, in other instances, you know, once again, it may be, you know, 100, 200 or more loans, and then sometimes of totally unequal size. You could have some little $300,000 or $400,000 loans mixed with some, you know, $20, $30 million loans. Also, geographically, even could be spread out depending on the branches of the bank. That, you know, you may have had a Dallas branch make some loans along with a Houston bank, along with a Miami bank, and those still theoretically could be packaged together. So it's not necessarily, I mean, you know, a lot of them were relatively geographically kind of, you know, together just by virtue of the local bank sort of making those loans and kind of packaging them together. But that's not inherently a requirement that, you know, that still could be brought in from across the country. Okay. Other questions? Good questions. So what other problems could you sort of foresee with this kind of a securitization?
That you misassess the risk of the individual loan.
Absolutely, you misassess the risk of the individual properties within the portfolio. And, or once again, you don't really have a good solid exit plan, you know, for the investors in the event that something does potentially blow up. Yeah.
What kind of legal action is taken, say, if, you know, there is misinformation given in the package, say?
The fraud, well, if it's fraud, I mean, it depends on if
fraud to a certain point,
yeah, who you can trace it back to.
Exactly.
You know,
so, I mean, if something bad happens to, you know, this, now that Morgan Stanley or wherever has it, can they go back to the banks and go, hey, listen, like, you didn't, you know,
And the bank is usually going to then try to put it off on the borrower.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so it just keeps getting passed down.
Right, and it's just a question of, well, who gave who what faulty information, or, you know, or did you not fully investigate something maybe you should have, you know, those sorts of things. But, you know, the problem that this sort of gets into, though, is, and this is one of the things I really want you to make sure that you fully understand is, all right, let's say that I am the borrower and I have gone to my local bank, you know, that Mark Brinker is the president of, and he makes me this wonderful loan, tells me, oh, this is the best interest rate you can possibly get, and it's going to be in this securitization deal that we're going to sell off, and because of that, we're giving you this great rate. We're going to lock you into it for the next 5 years, you know, at 5% interest. But yet, if you prepay this loan, yeah, there are going to be some issues. But, you know, I'm telling you, yeah, I'm planning on holding on to it for 5 years. You know, no issues, no problems. So I go ahead and you know, engage with Mark in this deal. All right. So Mark, as I said, immediately within the next, you know, few months has all these other loans, packages, sells them off to Dustin, who effectively is the Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs, and gets all those, you know, securities sort of pulled together and ultimately, you know, gets them, you know, issued. And then, you know, Tyler ends up being one of the investors that, you know, buys some of the A, B, or C pieces. And so everything is rocking and rolling just fine. And then all of a sudden, I decide, all right, I want to sell my property, or I've lost a bunch of tenants, I can no longer afford to make the mortgage payment as it is, or I'm in a situation of where I am at the end of my term, at the end of 5 years, and I can't find anybody to refinance it for me, which is the most common problem, okay, that occurred. And so I'm at the end of that 5 years. Market conditions have changed over 5 years. The property now has fewer tenants than it had whenever I originally got the loan 5 years ago. The market rents have plummeted. I get a reappraisal on the property. The property is not worth anywhere close to what I originally paid for it or have borrowed against it, but yet I don't have the money to be able to pay off the loan. So the only choice I've got is either to sell it or get it refinanced. Well, the market is so lousy, I can't really sell it for less than what I owe because you're not going to sign off on that. But yet you're also not going to probably allow me to alter my, or to a certain extent, even allow me to extend. So you're going to hold me in default. And if I want to like do any quote unquote negotiation, I very seldom can never even get in contact with you because there's usually a third party servicer like Alyssa here. And so I've got to go through Alyssa because she's the one that I'm submitting my checks to each month, and she's telling me that you're not willing or she doesn't have the authority to make any alterations whatsoever to the loan documents. So therefore, I've got to, either continue paying you, which I can't do, or I've got to effectively get the property refinanced, which I can't do. So I'm in this horrible limbo situation. So it's not the normal sort of situation of where I could have just gone back to Mark and said, hey Mark, let's work out an arrangement here. You're clearly aware of what has happened over the past 5 years with the market. You realize this may be a short-term phenomenon, in terms of the market being depressed and I'm not being able to get the rents I need, and let's do a workout deal and I, cut you in on part of maybe the potential equity on the property, something like that. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that because this overly complicated sort of deal structure that, and it's not even just Tyler that I've got to deal with. I mean, Tyler only owns maybe a few pieces of those sets of bonds, of the tranche A, tranche B, and tranche C. Those are spread out literally over potentially hundreds or thousands of people.
Are these investors typically individuals, private companies?
It's a total mix because they're traded.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So it's the sort of thing that in a lot of cases, yeah, they're bought in big blocks by investors. But it's a broad mix of the folks that are actually buying these things.
But the people who are actually paying would never be able to get in contact with me.
Right, and it's also trying to get you, to even almost vote, because there's not a mechanism even set up for that. If you follow what I'm sort of saying, it's kind of like you're the absentee property owner to a certain extent, or mortgage holder that's off in the Caymans somewhere, almost just unreachable. And so, and she's not really been given the authority.
To make decisions on that.
She has a limited scope of things that she can do, defined by the loan documents, but in a large number of instances, she really doesn't have the authority to do much of anything. Her whole thing of what she's been told, she is to try to maximize the value for the bondholders. The bondholders being the tranche A, tranche B, and tranche C, investors. Dustin.
But those interest rates aren't guaranteed, so why couldn't they be worked out? Without having to go back to Tyler and say, hey, would you agree to this? Tyler's expecting 5%, say, but it's not guaranteed that he's going to get 5%.
Well, it's not guaranteed. Her job is to maximize value, and a lot of times they don't want to take on the responsibility of effectively doing that. It's kind of like they're just going to let it play out.
So these aren't fixed rate?
They are fixed rate. They are fixed rate in the sense that you are supposed to be getting that,
yeah.
But in the event that something blows up, in other words, the tranche C blows up and the tranche B blows up and then tranche A, you could then theoretically not be getting what you were told you were going to be getting.
It still has that risk attached.
It still has risk, albeit supposedly low risk, the risk is still there.
How did these CMBSs then become almost like on from like on a retail side, you can go after a CMBS loan? How did it evolve to that?
Well, once again, it's really just the fact that the traditional retail lender, the normal sort of commercial lender that's out there, you know, operating in a market, is just simply looking for an opportunity for them to be able to sell off their loans, you know, into, you know, this structured portfolio. Their whole mindset is the more loans that we can make, the more money we can make on upfront fees and charges. You know, we're not really making our money off of the interest rate on the loan. We're making our money upfront on the initial loan origination fees.
So you as the borrower, you're going to go in there and you're going to know.
I mean, it's not like you're purposely going in as a borrower and saying, "Hey, Mr. Lender, give me a CMBS loan."
Right.
That's not inherently what's happening. What is happening is really more of the lender is saying, "All right, by the way, this is going to be sold off potentially into a securitized, you know, commercial mortgage-backed security. You would be made aware of that."
Right.
Now, you could then say, "No, not gonna, I don't want that. I want to have a locally serviced loan." And then they might just say, "No, all of our loans are being, you know, pushed off into the, you know, these securitized deals." Now, a lot of the really small banks, like the local kind of mom and pop, you know, sort of banks, a lot of them will go ahead and locally, you know, sort of service their loans. But once again, their loan size, you know, is going to be relatively, you know, limited as to, you know, what they're willing to do. Maybe, you know, $3, $5, $10 million loans.
As a borrower, what would your preference be? Would you mind having a, you know?
And see, that's exactly the sort of question you should be asking, because it depends. I mean, if you are 100% certain that over that 5-year term that you're sticking with this property, you're not going to sell it, you've got no issues in your mind of being able to have the tenants that are necessary to occupy it and keep the cash flow coming in, you know, that sort of thing, then without question it makes sense to go ahead and you know, have one of the CMBS loans, because your interest rate is going to be lower.
But if you want to have some more...
But if you want to have some flexibility and you want to not inherently, you know, be completely burdened by, you know, all of those kind of what ifs potentially going wrong, then you probably need to say, well, it might be worth paying an extra % or whatever it might be to get that just locally serviced loan.
Is it, if I'm as a borrower, what if I, you know, say take a loan out, whatever it may be, and then they don't tell me that it would be sold in the...
Normally, they're going to be required to disclose up front. Now, and usually, and sadly, a lot of that is sort of boilerplate kind of, you know, standard practice within the loan documents. We reserve the right to sell off this loan into a, you know.
So do they have to tell you that before they actually sell
Technically,
off?
whenever you're signing the loan documents, that would be in there. But, you know, a lot of times, once again, you may not be really paying attention or aware or, you know, whatever. You're just, you know.
I know, but I'm saying, like, you know, like 3 years down the road, you weren't expecting them to sell
Right.
that, and then suddenly they send you a notice saying, "Hey, by the way, you know."
Yeah, normally they are going to have to disclose that to you.
Okay.
But it's just a question of whether you really are paying attention as to whether or not
And it's just timing
it's in
of
there.
when they're going to end up.
Yeah, because a lot of times it takes them a while to package the loans together. Normally, and they're put into what, I mean, you know, they term kind of, it's a virtual warehouse. You know, they call it warehousing of loans, and so it's the whole thing of they kind of, as they've made them, they sort of stack them in there, and then once the quote-unquote virtual warehouse becomes full, then it's time to, you know, sell them off and clear it out so they can obviously start with a new portfolio of loans.
That was not just
Oh, okay.
the disclosing.
Yeah. Yeah, normally it is going to be disclosed. It's not an issue that inherently they're trying to hide it from you. It's just the problem of a lot of people don't really understand it. Is really what the problem is. The average ordinary borrower goes in and thinks, once again, I'm dealing with Mark here. You know, and I'm going to be dealing with Mark, you know, for the duration of this loan. And the reality of it may be, now that's not going to be the case. You know, within 6 months, it's out of your hands completely, and then, you know, I come to you and then you're just saying, too bad, so sad, go talk to Alyssa.
We don't want to talk about this.
All right? So, any other questions, thoughts, observations on it? I mean, in theory, it's a great thing. And you can see why some really smart folks at some point in time said, how do we create effectively this brand new market for loans, you know, and package it in such a way that we can sell this thing off, you know, to a wider variety of folks. It's brilliant. But then, once again, whenever you start delving into the details of, well, once again, what if something goes wrong, something doesn't quite go according to plan, then the whole thing potentially blows up and becomes a big problem really quick. Yep.
So do these have to get approved by the government, or is this something
No.
where you go to the rating agency and you
The
say-
rating agencies are the ones that are officially the stamp of approval.
So they pay them?
Right. The rating agencies are paid, you know, to be an independent reviewer of the information, of the loans and how this whole thing is sort of set up. And you know, my experience, the rating agencies, a lot of it, I don't want to be too cruel on the rating agencies, but yet what would happen as a matter of practice is the rating agencies would send out, in many cases, fresh college graduates, you know, from, you know, smart kids, you know, that sort of thing, but yet inexperienced, to actually come in and do the auditing of a lot of this information. Folks that really didn't fully understand all of the financial implications and fully understand kind of how some of these things were would blow apart in the event of things not going according to plan. And so you would have, you know, the rating agency maybe give the folks that are putting these things together, you know, a AAA rating, but the reality was it really wasn't a AAA grade asset. It was maybe, you know, something substantially lower than that, but yet they just didn't do a really good job of assessing what that risk really was. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because we started about the 70s when banks started to pool their mortgage.
I'm sorry?
I'd say that I think we started in the 70s.
No, well, no, for residential, totally different.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, residential, that was all, a lot of that was government related in terms of the securitization. We're talking about commercial. Commercial, totally different animal, because up until the 1980s, virtually all commercial loans were made by the local banks and effectively serviced by the local banks. And it really wasn't until the commercial mortgage-backed security industry emerged in the late 80s, 90s, that you really started getting momentum of more and more of the loans being made by or being put into commercial mortgage-backed securities. Yeah, the residential mortgage-backed security stuff has been around for a lot longer.
With what happened in like 2008 with the recession, have we seen like some of these pension funds or institutional investors backing away from these?
Absolutely, and you know, and certainly requiring additional information and trying to be more cautious about you know, what actually is being put into these deals. Because what ends up happening, I mean, if you can just sort of imagine, you know, these institutional players that are putting these things together, every single time they put together a new one, they want to push the envelope just a little bit. Well, how much more risk can we maybe tack onto this? Can we maybe readjust the profile of this deal to where it's just a little bit more risky? Is anyone really going to notice? And can we maybe skim just a little bit more off the top? You follow what I'm saying? And you sort of keep pushing and pushing and pushing until maybe it gets to the point of where you finally have some of these things that are being made. The risk profile is nowhere just remotely resembling what the underlying portfolio it's representing, you know, actually is. And then, as I said, it begins to blow up, the whole thing begins to blow apart, and then those, you know, handful of really, you know, bad ones along with the other ones, because think of it like this. Maybe you only have a handful of loans that maybe should not have been made, but yet they still were made. To what extent, does that still have an impact on other properties that maybe were marginal or certainly, maybe reasonably okay? If you, in other words, just think of it like from a retail perspective. You've got, I don't know, let's just throw out a number, 500,000 square feet of retail space within a market. But maybe that market really only needed 400,000 square feet of retail, but you've oversupplied the market. So now all of a sudden, that bottom 100,000 square feet is going to probably stay empty or not perform as it should, and then potentially, blows up into what extent that is going to impact some of the other folks that are in the market as well, potentially causing their loans to blow up. You sort of follow what I'm saying? And so, that's part of what tends to happen is that on the lending side, that even a few loans that are made that should have never been made tend to potentially kind of blow things up. I mean, certainly on the residential side, that's the case as well. That even now, what are we beginning to hear? We're beginning to hear these situations of where people are beginning to be given loans again that probably should not be given loans, all because the lenders are sort of saying, well, hey, we can, the floodgates to a certain extent have opened, the market has rebounded, everybody's feeling good about everything, so we're going to start opening the floodgates of loaning money to a lot of people that probably should not be loaned money to, or to properties that should not be loaned money to. Okay, all right, questions? Okay, let's take about a 5-minute break, come back. Oh, by the way, just I don't know whether any of you noticed it. It was kind of funny. Remember last week when in the development class when we were talking about the whole shared office space thing? That literally the day after that, the South Florida Business Journal, an entire article, actually like a 4-page article on beyond the traditional workplace, talking about all of the issues surrounding basically this whole concept of office hoteling and that sort of thing. So I thought that was fascinating that we had that discussion literally the day after they came out with this article. But one of the things that they had mentioned, which I thought was also interesting, I had meant to mention but I had forgot to, was this whole idea of shared workspaces and these collective workspaces. You heard about these folks, and actually there's one here that's just across the street, and I'm trying to see if that's one of the things that we can put on the scheduled tour. It's called Access Space. Have you heard of it? Any of you? I'll show you the website real quick. Okay, the website is accessspace.com, and let's see here.
Refresh it. Okay. Well, You should probably refresh the page.
well, in general, the concept, as you can sort of see from the pictures, is the idea that effectively it's kind of an open floor plan office concept, but you rent effectively a desk, okay? And so, to a certain extent, a space kind of like this, you may have, kind of your own sort of cubicle and closed space. You can rent basically just a space where you can just, there's not actually a fixed desk, you just sort of come in and use whatever is currently available. You pay a flat fee per month, and it's great for obviously small business owners that maybe only has 1 or 2 employees. Come here, a place to actually congregate with other folks in a variety of different industries. And I think like this one specifically you kind of look down some of the people, you can kind of click on what they do: online marketing, web design, real estate, architecture, or but the whole concept of this business of shared workspaces and that sort of thing, you can, I mean, theoretically, you know, you can have an attorney, an accountant, a landscape architect, a, you know, architectural designer, web developer, you know, all independently employed of each other, you know, so, but yet the idea is that by being able to sort of be there collectively together, are there synergies that potentially, you know, one can kind of feed off of the other with respect to, you know, you get some business to what extent that you maybe need an attorney or an accountant, well, you can use somebody there within the space, maybe trade off of services, you know, a whole number of things can kind of take place there. So think about this for a few minutes. Go ahead and take a break now, and we'll come back and we'll talk about it. And also give you a chance to pull up their website, which is accessspace.com. Let's see if I can get the video to work for you.
What's going on, man? You good? Doing good, man.
Saving up.
Well, I like the curry now.
Oh, yeah,
We have a whole hour.
Today, you not having that?
No.
I was in the thing, it's actually, I choose this ridiculous.
You're a guy. You like it.
Exactly, I can zone out. I can look at it right now. I'm trying to listen to it.
That's good because I'm not talking. So you're going to the show tonight?
Seinfeld.
Yep.
I'm so excited. I've been looking forward to it.
It'll be a good show.
Hope so. They're looking like 7.
It's gonna be busy.
It's gonna be good. It's gonna be good.
Yeah, I was there last weekend.
It was back.
No, it actually was like empty. I was shocked
really
because
don't-
it was the Food and Wine Festival.
Yeah, and I don't think, you know, the Honda Classics going on over in West Palm and stuff, I really don't think there's gonna be a lot of people.
I don't know what the Honda Classic is.
That's PJ Tour event. Oh. You know what the Honda Classic is?
I apologize.
You should apologize.
I've never golfed before in my life.
Never?
No.
She didn't know.
I want to.
Your future hubby will definitely appreciate it.
I think everyone's staying home for the classic.
I don't know. All my buddies are in it. One of the guys that I used to work with is in the league going in yesterday.
Oh, yeah?
I got like 10 or 15 guys on that buddies with. You drink waters, I think. Which I heard. Are we watching a movie?
Well, no, I was just trying to play the video on this thing, but for whatever reason, the audio doesn't seem to be working.
None of those buttons.
I have, it's like everything is showing that it's working, but it's not.
Yeah.
This looks like she's about to pop. What?
I just heard the last.
Yeah. Where is everyone now?
There's no one here today.
This is I'm just not gonna go.
I think it worked, I mean, earlier it was working with YouTube. Right is my side.
Right, because I haven't looked at it since. Honestly, it's that. It's nothing that really looked at.
I mean, everything, there's no mutes, there's no, everything is,
If you were good at the last one, you're in fun.
oh well.
Mara? Your middle name? That's pretty cool middle name. Mara? What's her middle name?
Sarah.
Oh, wow. Your family did that?
They didn't do the first two on purpose, and then apparently their daughter was like, are you aware that the first two of your daughter's middle names are? I don't want to leave this one out.
So, there we go. Oh, yeah, you're right. We should do that.
So it's Sarah, Mara, and Farrah.
Sarah.
Yeah, there's I was,
Dara?
I dated this girl in high
Stacy,
school.
Sarah, Michelle,
Her
Sarah,
family was,
Alyssa, Matt.
her family was Stephanie, Sam, Sophia, Sandra, Sabrina, and then the kid was, they had one boy, his name's Anthony. And I was like, you can go Sean or nothing, like.
Have you ever seen 1959?
No.
That
would be. I didn't realize there were 19 names that could start with a J. I'm thinking of John and
Don't watch me.
Jason.
So you're thinking like names when we grew up. Now there's like Jaden. And
there's like weird stuff. I'm naming my kid,
Mario went right after for you?
Glenn,
Yeah.
how did you decide that? How did your wife feel about that?
I don't know why.
Yeah, no, I'm aware.
I'm in charge of my relationships, okay?
Oh,
She's gonna listen to me.
okay.
No, I don't know.
When I meet her, I'll let her know.
Yeah.
You feel that
Oh, by
way.
the way, I was in the future husband. I was in class with him. He said, "So how's the listening to him?"
Yeah.
How's that going for you? I like to watch some of the old stuff. I got it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just plugging in. Subbing it in and making it.
When you're doing the backdoor approach, you typically try to find either the NOI or the ADS one first. Is there like a specific one you should definitely try to get before you start?
You gotta have
Working
both.
backwards.
Well, you've gotta, well, if you're working backwards, you're gonna have the ADS first, and you're gonna, from the ADS, then you're gonna back solve into the 999.
It's like, an undersized used to run
By the way, I was watching a video, somewhere around the second video.
I mean, but it's
It
all
looked like you looked into the thing. It's like,
commercial. I mean, just think about it. Go hard. I have a commercial building.
What?
you like looked into the camera on the, like the second video of last week's class.
Yeah.
Felt like you were looking into my soul. Like you should be here. You should have been in this class. I felt you made me feel bad.
No. Yeah, I had questions about like how to fill out and stuff out.
How do you spell that? The access?
Yeah, AXIS space .com.
Oh, access space.
That's where, I mean, I was thinking,
It's that afternoon, really.
yeah, the presentation. So we have 2 weeks until today and then.
Good morning. Is that fresh brewed coffee? Indeed. Feeling productive? Feeling inspired? What do you feel like today? Collaboration? Or solo work? Couch? Or desk? Indoors or...
All right.
We're gonna watch Wolf of Wall Street. What about us?
Okay, so this access space thing, as we were talking about before the break, this kind of co-shared sort of working space, and I said the website axis, AXIS space.com. Located, like I said, just here across the street from us on Los Olas. It is, if you take a look at their website, one of the things they show the pricing, and you can get the open workspace for $300 a month, what they call a bubble space for $900 or $1,500 a month, and then a larger space for about $2,200, $2,800 a month. And then also it looks like that you can rent conference rooms kind of by the hour. Also, we've got larger spaces to host events, parties, that sort of thing. So, I mean, what do you think just about that as a concept, you know, sort of moving forward into the future, you know, getting away from kind of the more traditional sort of office setting into something like this? I mean, obviously it's great for small businesses, you know, sort of startups, get nice space, nice furniture, you know, nice reception areas, you know, nice common areas, but yet, you know, you're sort of paying for everything kind of almost a la carte. So, I mean, what do you think about that? Good idea, bad idea?
Great idea.
Especially for startups.
Yeah, exactly. Smaller companies.
I definitely think it's probably a little bit more expensive over the long haul.
Yeah, but then again, you know, you probably have a lot fewer sort of obligations as well, because you're here. My understanding is you don't have to sign like a long-term lease. You can do it like a month-to-month sort of situation, so that any event that your small business, whatever it might be, doesn't quite work out, there's not this huge obligation of you having to commit to a 5-year lease term in a traditional office space. Laura?
And I was gonna say, it reduces the cost of business, and at the same time, you can use that money for something else.
Okay.
You know, instead of leasing a huge space.
Sure, but because I mean, just a startup cost alone, you know, for a small office, you know, in terms of buying your furniture, you know, getting, you know, the space set up, getting phone lines installed, getting internet access, you know, all of those sorts of things that are just time consuming, and you know, all that's taken care of for you. So, you know, from that standpoint, you pretty much just literally tomorrow lease a space, walk in, start up shop, start working. Yep.
I think the other thing is that if you want to get into the downtown area and you're a small business, if you go and you say, I want to lease 300 square feet, they're going to
Laugh at you. Right.
I mean, I've gotten phone calls for it before, and like, there's nothing I can do with it. Like, you can go to Regis, you can go to one of those companies that do something like that, but the brokers aren't gonna get you into their building for 300 square
Right,
feet for
because
the
it's not-
short term or the long term.
Right, it's just not worth their time. And you know, in one sense, there are aspects of this that are not brand new. You know, there have always been buildings that have catered toward, you know, smaller, you know, once again, kind of mom and pop sort of office, you know, users. But yet, this concept, to me, it's a lot different because in many instances, it's more of an open floor plan. It's more of a shared, you know, kind of workspace environment, a little bit more of a collegial kind of, you know, to a certain extent, you know, more informal. You know, you don't have necessarily people walking around in coats and ties. You know, so it has that kind of more urban kind of you know, sort of feel and experience to it.
I've been at Regis for 2 years, and I've been actually saving money from what I had before. I have the same workspace, but I use the services at will. What I need a conference room every day, so I just rent it whenever I need it. I need you know, the secretarial
Right.
services every day. So I think for me, it works better to be on a space like this than to have my own space
Right.
and taking care of the cleaning lady and, you know.
Well, it's just, yeah, it's a lot less things you have to think about.
Yeah.
Do they offer like daily? Like?
Yeah, actually, they do. I mean, I think there's a daily fee. I don't know, I forget what the dollar amount is, but yeah,
So, I
you
mean,
can.
if you're traveling or
Right.
whatever it may be, and you need it, you know, something for a week or 2 days or 3
Right.
days, this would be ideal,
Yeah.
especially in downtown.
With this space, how many people you allow to?
I don't know. I mean, what the total max space that they've got a couple of floors over there. I've toured it, and I mean, it's a couple of floors it's a condo building. It's, if you sort of look straight ahead, it's the tallest building in downtown Fort Lauderdale, but the top floors are all condominium. But this is like the ground floor, like the bottom 2 floors are all set up for this space. And they've got it where, I mean, there's a fair amount of space for them to expand into. But it's, you know, meant to be, you know, kind of, as I said, just sort of that first come, first serve for part of the space, but then other parts are dedicated, you know, that you pay and you have exclusive access to that, you know, individual locked sort of glass door to your office kind of thing.
One of the drawbacks I can see from it is the mix of uses. You know, the same way, you know, Mark can be an architect, which might be helpful for me. He could also be some other business, and it kind of distracts what I'm trying to get done.
Sure.
Or just the people in general around could be distractions as well.
Yep.
I was gonna say, within the same note, I went to this Dunkin' Donuts in Davie, and they have a huge conference room in the Dunkin' Donuts that you can rent out with
Yeah,
nice
so-
chairs,
Interesting.
like a screen where you can, like, you know, same thing here.
Right.
And you can just do business there.
Interesting.
Yeah, I saw
I had
something
not
like that
heard
too.
of received
Yeah.
that.
Is it
Yeah, interesting combo.
It's
Smart.
one on Sunrise.
Yeah, you sit there, and it's right on Stereo 84,
That's an interesting
where
combo.
the roundup is. and it's
Yes, and they have this, the competing.
Leslie, you had something else? Oh, okay, Dustin?
How would that work as far as like getting your certificate of uses and?
I think you just have it categorized as a general office space. Because I mean, it really is all it is. It's not like they're manufacturing anything there or inherently, it's
No,
not.
but I mean, a person, you could have, it's like a gym membership where
Right.
if everyone in the gym came the same day, there wouldn't be enough room for everybody.
Right.
You know, parking requirements for that, and I'm just wondering,
Nope.
like, if you take that concept and you take it down to the city for the first time
Right.
ever they've seen it, I wonder how that would,
Well, my understanding is that in this particular instance, that the parking situation, that they have a certain number of spaces that you can purchase for use at in their underground parking garage. And then they, I think, also have an arrangement with this parking garage as well for overflow space. But yeah, I don't think that was at least not that I'm aware of, was a concern.
but if you want to do this in Texas and they had never seen it before, what's the approach with the
Yeah,
city on something like that?
I think it's just you'd be selling it more as, well, this is just office space. You know, and not really maybe get into too much detail as to, because I mean, the concept of once again, executive office space thing is you know, one that's been around for quite some time, but you know, this whole idea of the shared collective workspace of something like this is, you know, only within the past probably 5 years or so. I mean, we visited one in Seattle a couple of years ago. It's called the Hive, and it was, you know, set up very similar to this, you know, but and probably 30 or 40 different, you know, small businesses, all kind of, once again, you know, all independent of each other, but yet all to a certain extent feeding off of each other. But it also provided, you know, a sense of community as well, that those folks that ordinarily might be just sort of stuck at home, you know, working, that, you know, this was an opportunity to still have some level of socialization, you know, with other folks, even though they might be in different fields or whatever it might be, you know, within that kind of an office context. Okay. Other thoughts? Yep.
Wouldn't it be like, instead of counting how many employees per square footage, you can just count how many members per day, kind of like go and use it?
Yeah, no, I think so. I don't think that it's a big problem, you know, at least not yet, of where it's oversubscribed. I mean, you know, it's new enough. They're still kind of, you know, kind of going through the growing pains of getting enough subscribers to keep it viable, you know, long term. It's just, I mean, I think the concept is great. I just, you know, sometimes the difficulty is, you know, once again, getting enough other folks to sort of buy into the idea.
Yes, you gotta spend a lot of money marketing it.
Yeah.
Because you got that probably constant turnover in there.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, let's move forward. All right, let's finish up. We've got a few more sort of calculations. All right, so moving on in terms of other sort of finance topics we need to probably move on through. We got through the securitization stuff this morning, so let's talk for a few minutes about reverse annuity mortgages. Now this is more of a residential thing, but yet again, something else that you probably need to be familiar with. You probably see advertisements for them all the time on TV. But we'll talk a little bit about how they work and kind of the concept behind them. There's no reason inherently you couldn't potentially set up a commercial property this way. I don't know why you would, but still it might be possible. So what is a reverse annuity mortgage? Anybody?
Somebody who owns their house outright can take out a mortgage on it.
But the way that it's structured, you know, whenever these things were first introduced, probably in the 1970s, there were probably a bit more, I'm trying to think of the right word, they effectively almost were set up purposely to a certain extent to take advantage of older people, retirees, and weren't necessarily being offered by traditional lenders. You know, it was like effectively an investor, you know, coming in, you know, what my first exposure to them was developer trying to do large-scale land assembly over sort of a long period of time and trying to effectively buy up all the houses within in an area to ultimately tear them down, you know, at some future date and time. And so would engage, you know, in this reverse annuity mortgage maybe for 10, 15 years with whoever the property owner is, but then at the end of the 15 years, the folks had to vacate their home, and then ultimately the land would be scraped, and then, you know, whatever it was going to be built would be built there. But the origin of the idea really kind of goes back to, you know, very simplistically saying that you've got someone, they own their home free and clear. I mean, it's worth $500,000. They've got maybe a very limited fixed income, you know, coming in off of Social Security or some sort of a pension plan, finding it difficult to sort of make ends meet. And so this one asset that they own that's worth quite a bit, but they really can't tap into it, you know, to get their equity out of it easily. So what they do is they've created this reverse annuity mortgage. It's different than an equity loan, like a home equity loan. Yeah.
Do they have to be completely paid off? Or do they have to
Yeah, pretty much. You're going to need to be paid off in order to
completely paid off, or?
pretty much completely paid off, yeah. Because what's going to happen is the mortgage is going to be taken out against it, is going to basically be paying them, paying the borrower, or effectively in this case, paying the homeowner, a set amount each and every month for a specified period of time. And whenever some of these things were first put forward, it can be kind of sensitive to sometimes, even talk about this with folks, but I mean, it's the whole idea of, okay, here's somebody who's 60 years old, and you're basically saying to them, all right, your life expectancy is for another 15 years, so you're going to be dead at the age of, whatever, 85, 75, whatever it might be, and effectively we're going to engage in this arrangement, and I'm going to pay you, a few $1,000s a month, and at the end of this period of whatever it is, 15 years, 20 years, we're done, your house is worth nothing, and effectively at that point, you've got to move out.
Or promise to die. And it's now theirs.
Yeah, and it's now obviously the bank's. Some of these were also set up to where even if that did happen, potentially the person that was living there would be continued to allow them to live there, but with no payments until they did die. There are all manner of ways that these things could be structured, I guess is my point. But the most standard, normal one would be that, yeah, at the end of whatever that period is, the 15, 20 years or so, then the person would be paid out and then ultimately would have to vacate the property. Make sense? So what do you think about that as a concept?
As the owner of the property, if you don't have anyone to pass that property out to, or you don't feel obligated to give to anybody else, then it's a great idea. Why would you not do it?
Okay.
That few $1,000s a month, does it equate to the cost of the actual home, the value of the home?
Yeah, I mean, it does. I mean, it literally, the only reason it's called a reverse annuity mortgage is just that simply it's flipped around. So instead of you making monthly payments to a lender, the lender is effectively making monthly payments to you, but it's just, it's sort of like you start off with this value of this $500,000 home, and then each and every month, the amount that effectively they've paid you, has accumulated about, now you could, theoretically, at the end of all of this or sometime during it, if you had the money to do so, you could pay it off, or you could pay them back.
Mm-hmm.
But very seldom does that happen. Most of the time it is a situation of where...
There's an interest rate.
Yeah, there's an interest rate that's going to be attached to it. So
so they always have the option to buy it back?
They don't always have the option, but as a general rule, there would be that opportunity. Yep.
I know, because I've experienced it in contracting, that they do come into the property periodically, and they'll force you to do improvements. Like, they think your roof is bad, you got to put a new roof on it, and so you do have to maintain the property. I think to a very high standard when it comes to this, because they do come in and they do
Sure.
inspections.
Well, because they want the property to obviously be well enough maintained, the value is not going to be lost
Right.
on the property at the end of the term. So that's an excellent point to bring up, is the whole aspect of the maintenance. Yep.
What's supposing the industry went back, does the mortgage company would lose some kind of money?
Most of the time, yes, they would be, I mean, in other words, the payments would still be due to the borrower or to the homeowner. You're asking if the values overall have gone down.
Yeah.
Normally, I mean, unless, once again, depending on the loan documents, but normally that is a financial obligation that they have to that homeowner.
If the homeowner dies before the 15 years is up, then what happens?
Normally, it would be the situation that whoever their heirs are would be able to effectively continue those payments for that set term. But in some of the machinations of this in the past, it was kind of like the agreement would just simply be, until you die, we will make you these payments, and then they'd be owed nothing.
It's like,
So I mean, so the reason I'm hedging on some of this is because they can all be structured of, just like a regular mortgage can be structured a whole bunch of different ways, so can a reverse annuity mortgage.
Yes.
And to a certain extent, they are and can be regulated by each individual state as to what they will allow.
So it'll say something like until you die or 15 years, whichever one comes first.
Maybe not so bluntly, but yeah.
Yeah, but the rates, you know, from the lender's perspective, it could be really low rates, and really their
Right.
value proposition is here's an income stream.
Yep.
So they can take advantage of the appreciation of the property.
And that's also kind of part of the mindset from the lender is if they see the market increasing, then you know, it's almost a no-risk proposition for them, or a very low-risk proposition for them.
Yeah.
But if it's pretty volatile, then, you know, they're gonna probably be less, you know, interested in doing that unless, once again, they've got language within the loan documents that somehow protects them, which they probably would. Okay, yep.
You know, some of these retirement home, these things that.
Yeah, no, a lot of retirement homes are set up in this way as well, that to a certain extent that you will almost be required to contribute your entire net wealth, you know, to them, and then they will effectively use the proceeds off of that to pay for your stay within the retirement home. Yep, okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how to actually calculate one of these, or one approach to sort of, so kind of making the assumption that we just did of a $500,000 home. And once again, we're going to assume 12 payments per year in this particular instance. And let's say we use an 8% interest rate for 15 years. And all we're really doing is saying that theoretically, each month the homeowner would get roughly this $47.78.26 for the duration of the 15 years. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of 15 years, the property is worth zero, at least, or not the property is worth zero, but their equity within the property is effectively worth zero. Make sense?
And they sign over the deed.
Right. Okay. Questions? All right. Let's move forward. Other items that we've talked about.
So you just calculate it the same way you're just, really you're the bank.
But it's just from the bank's perspective, and so you're just reversing things around. Yep.
Okay. This would be really smart if you had like some heirs, like say you were gonna die next year, but you wanted to do a reverse, you know, or a reverse annuity, and then once you die, your heirs will continue to get that money. Is it possible, I guess, even after you die, or while you're alive, to rent that out as well, so you're getting two sources of income? Say I rent it out to Ryan, and I'm getting paid for my reverse annuity, that means I'm getting, is that allowed, or would that be?
That's a good question. I don't know why, in one sense, it wouldn't, because
you're technically still own it, but you're just.
Right, and then you would actually move into another third location, yeah.
I mean, I don't know if there's any rules on whether or not that has to be your, you know.
Right. Primary residence.
Primary residence or whatever it may be.
There might be, but once again, I mean, sometimes it's not, you know.
So that means even when you die, you're still, anyway.
Yeah, no, it's generating income.
Yeah. You're getting, double.
Right, but then again, but I mean, the only real aspect is that it's kind of like where you sort of set it up. It has a definite end term.
Yes.
In the sense that, you know, at the end of that, whatever, 15, 20 years, that you're going to stop getting income altogether.
Oh, yeah,
You know,
yeah,
no
exactly.
rental income, no, yeah.
Exactly. But
That's
in order
the-
to maximize it, I'm saying.
Right, yeah, to maximize the upfront cash flow, absolutely, yeah.
They always say that you have to be a primary resident.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
No, I mean, I think that it makes sense. I mean, it's just a question of, yeah, whether or not you're going to be precluded from doing so only, but then again, it's also how closely do they police that?
Exactly,
You
I
know,
don't know, that's what,
and that's-
when you do a reverse annuity, do they say?
But then what Dustin was sort of saying that, you know, obviously the inspections aspect, you know, that might be one of the.
Exactly, but you can do those
Right.
inspections as a,
Right.
lease,
Right. Yeah, it's interesting to think about. Okay. Let's see, what other items we need to finish up here. We, all right, let's talk real quickly about a loan refinancing. All right, let's say that your current loan $1 million